trust and trusting sound is difficult to do in this day and age, because lots of people are working with lots of different setups in different rooms and, you know, whatever, and it's kind of hard to get in and trust something like immediately.
We were transforming houses into temporary studios, for example in the Sahara Desert or in the mountains of Albania. We were just renting places that I have never heard before, making records inside. So how can I trust that the client really listens or hears the same vision as I do?
Every studio has a different setup, so the only thing that I can rely has to be the headphones. Because I know a lot of speakers, I got to know a lot of boards, I know the Neve, I know the SSL, I know how to run these people. I even know the speakers, but you know better than me that that particular speaker is gonna sound different in a particular different place. And little nuances, which are what I'm looking for, is actually gonna be different. So I need to have some steadiness on what I hear.
After my first 4 years of my career, all I knew was Trident. I didn't even realize back then how bizarre it was to have one set of speakers which were maybe 6-7 foot tall, and then these little cube boxes, and that was what we had. To me, it was just mind-blowing that we were having to check mixes that we were making in the best possible world for the best possible sound with these huge speakers, and then we were having to judge them by this little tinny transistor radio or by the little radio in the little speaker, mono speaker in the console. And that really changed my awareness about monitoring and started to realize how important monitoring is.
If you're working with audio, you need to have a reliable monitoring. There's just absolutely no way around it. You can use studio monitors and a little bit of room acoustics, or you can use headphones, or ideally, you would use them both, monitors and studio headphones.
With studio monitors, it's more of a big picture. It's more like stepping back a few feet and listening to the mix as a whole, the feeling of the mix. So it's about energy, it's about moving air, and it's about feeling the music and getting a general sense of how a mix is shaping up. And then what happens is I need to get more into the details. And so that's when I'll switch to headphones, because headphones allow me to get really focused listening, really into the nuances of a mix, and also things like precise placement of the instruments across the soundstage. You get a general sense of that with monitors, but I find that sometimes you then on headphones you can hear that more clearly, and just the slightest change can bring an element out and it can feel more separated and more in its own space. And that kind of thing, personally speaking, I can find that I can miss a little bit on monitors, whereas headphones I can dial in more to make those sorts of critical decisions.
Our listening experience when speakers are in front of us to the sides is slightly different to our listening experience when the speakers are attached to our ears on the side of our head. So I've got to be very aware of, okay, I've got these fantastic speakers, I think they're the best in the world, but then I need to know that my mix translates. As I'm mixing, I'm always referencing all my speakers. If I do a little bit of trickery, if I'm moving something around, I want to check on the headphones that it's moving at the same speed, in the same direction, or the same height. In my case, I've got to have headphones that I can relate to, that I trust, that I think sound the same as my speakers. So that's why more than ever, headphones are important. 40, 50 years ago, we had to check our mixes on a mono transistor radio. That's how people heard music. Breakfast in the bathroom, getting ready with a transistor radio, listening to music in the car on the drive to school or drive to work. These days, people listen to music with earbuds or headphones. So I've got to be so aware of that process and so aware of what the listener, how they're hearing their music. It's crucial to know that you can trust that what you're doing translates.
I couldn't use my studio monitors because of neighbors, and I often worked late and it would keep my family up. So I started trying to research into really good headphones for potentially this scenario. And right from the beginning, I knew I wanted something really flat and even, because my experience with headphones before that had either been studio headphones that are really tinny, or commercial headphones and Bluetooth headphones that most people seem to use these days feel really hyped in the bass to me, and I really don't like that. I mean, it's fun if I'm listening to hip hop, but I don't like it for working at all. These new X1s are really, really super helpful to keep on going A/B back and forth between monitors, headphones, monitors, headphones when I'm into production.
I think it's very important to know that the stereo image is different in real life with loudspeakers, with monitors, than with headphones. So, and one great thing on the X1 is now to have the emulation, where you can actually try to think yourself into a studio and work with working with reflections. Because what happens a lot of times when you're using with headphones, when you're working with headphones, with uncalibrated headphones, is that you're missing out on the stereo field, and that the stereo field sounds different in the studio than it sounds on the headphones. And there's a lot of things to fix, and having the possibility to pre-monitor in different surroundings while using the headphones, like with the calibration software, makes things way easier.
I've had various scenarios where I've done something somewhere and I've come back to my space and I've gone, oh my God, what is that? This can't have been me. I can't have made this, because this does not sound good. But it was the environment that kind of poured that out of me, right? But that's why I kind of started moving towards actually, even in different environments, spending some time on my headphones that I trust. And so for me, I think the ability for you to be able to do anything anywhere is fantastic. It's amazing. It's like a wonder of modern times. However, I will say that it's not all it's cracked up to be, and having a trusted pair of headphones is definitely all it's cracked up to be. Because I'll be honest with you, sometimes, I want to have a Saturday morning off, and so I sit there and I just put in my trusted headphones and I'll be just doing things that I want to do, sometimes from my bed.
I'm often mixing in a hybrid setup, so I'm having my speakers in my home studio and I'm having my headphones. With the headphones, I go more into detail. It's like a microscope for me, and I can hear where everything sits. And later on the speakers, I just love to feel the energy. When I'm in different rooms and have speakers, the speakers actually adapt to the room. And sometimes I just can't trust them 100% to understand what's going on. But with headphones, they solve the issue of monitoring while recording, like a live band.
what is the role of headphones in front of house? Do you even use headphones at all?
Sure. There's two things that we need to focus when you do FOH. When you are on tour, I mean, if you are on tour with Depeche Mode or Madonna, you definitely have like 2 or 3 days to set up everything nice. You got time to listen what's going on in whatever venue you are. But when you're on a tour bus with Thomas Lang on drums, Paul Gilbert on the guitar, and all these people, very rock stuff, but you actually, today you're in Sevilla, tomorrow you're in Madrid, and then you're in Paris. It's tour bus thing. You just jump in. I have my personal playlist of music that I really like in general, so I play it to the actual place. For example, over there the headphones is very important, because when I start to miking and check the miking of everybody on stage, which is very, I mean, drums, amplifiers, vocals, so it's not a line check, it's not like keyboards, it's really microphones. I really want to hear what's going on. I don't know, let's say if this 200 that I hear very redundant is actually the actual place, or is coming from the actual miking on the amplifier. So the headphones is really important for that, for example.
Monitoring is not just about the frequency response. It's not just about what's flat, because you can have a very, very nicely tuned room and speakers that are, perfectly flat, and you can have headphones, with the same frequency response at the eardrum, and yet they will sound different, because it's not just the frequency response that comes into play here. It's also the reflections and how much air you have to move, the harmonics, distortions, and all the things that kind of shape the character of a playback device. So speakers sound different than headphones do. The obvious difference is that headphones are like really close to your ears, and there's basically no crosstalk between the two, the left and the right speaker, while of course if you have 2 studio monitors in front of you, you have crosstalk over there, you have reflections from your walls, and all of that creates a very different soundscape. It's important to understand this in order to place the instruments, in the sound stage, in the soundscape, the panning from left to right, and depth and height and so on. You need to understand how that is different between headphones and monitors in order to make the right decisions. The best way around this is to build your own list of reference tracks.
So whenever I'm traveling, if I am running into a situation where I'm going to be using a guest recording space or guest mixing space, I don't go with trust of just like, oh yeah, he likes the sound of this, I'm going to like it, or he or she likes the sound of it. I put on reference material. It's always reference material, and on my phone I have like an SPL meter. And so I just put it on my desk, and I set it to like 82 dBSPL or something like that. I want to see what the room does at that volume. So if at 75 it sounds good, but at 85 the room is starting to react in a weird way, then I know, okay, so I put a mix that I've done myself, I put the reference on, and I listen, and I'm like, there's so much low mid buildup at 85. Then, at 95, it's just unrecognizable. Then I just know where my limitation is, and I'll be like, okay, I can't mix any louder than 75. So that's one thing I'll do. The other thing I'll do is I'll just use headphones. I'll just put on headphones, like, yep, I know what this sounds like. So, and I'll reference back and forth, and I'll use the mains for playback, for review. So, someone will come in the room, like G will come in and like, hey, how's this going? I'll hit the monitor button, play it out, and they're not going to care what it sounds like in the room, they just want to hear it loud.
It's late to late nights and alone conversations with a stranger. I didn't know, swearing this will be the last, but it
What's really big for me is having a direction, how a band wants to sound in their upcoming album, and giving references for that. And in my workflow, working with reference tracks is really important. And by the same context, working with headphones or monitors that are telling me the truth, when I'm comparing tracks like that, when I'm comparing my mix to a released reference track, that is the goal for the overall sound that this band want for their album, that's super important to me. And having tools to facilitate that, you know, that's where my money goes. You know, that's what's important.
The workflow we have now, we have to work fast. That's one thing. The other thing, at least in my case, because the YouTube channel and my academy, sometimes I'm away from the studio, I'm doing a master class, or I'm recording in different studios. You need to find that pair of headphones that you really trust in. That's very important, because it's going to allow you to move, you know, to be free.
I think the most important thing is always to calibrate your ears before making mixing decisions. So what I usually do is, like, I have a list on Spotify with songs that I know work great on every system. If you cannot hear what you're doing because your headphones are poor or the resolution is poor, then you end up like throwing things on tracks that you don't need. Imagine you're using a valve preamp, but you didn't need it in the beginning, so you end up having like a colored sound, and you need to fix it in the mixing stage. It helps a lot to know if it's necessary or if it's not, and it only makes sense if you can really hear what you're doing.
Once your mix of a song or video production is at the finish line, it's time to check if it will really translate. Translation is rooted in flat frequency response as the foundation for making mixing decisions. But checking the soundscape and positioning of instruments require a double check, a cross check in other rooms and other devices. The X1 mixing headphones were designed with exactly that in mind. The X1 are basically a full monitoring solution. Yes, they are calibrated, that's great, but they also have this capability together with the software to emulate different rooms and different environments and different target curves, like the Harman target, for example. So you can cross-check your work on a laptop anywhere you are, and you can take your reference tracks with you to a studio that you've never been in before. And you can just, make sure that what you're hearing there kind of works with what you're used to, that it works with your reference tracks, so you can kind of gauge your way through the mixing session in the environment that you're not familiar with.
This happened to me a lot of times, that on tour I was doing really hard. I was putting hard work in getting the low end right, but at the end it wasn't the right low end because I couldn't hear properly. So in the end, having a good calibrated system where you know what you're doing saves you a lot of time at the end of the creative process. That's what I'm saying. Also, because I'm doing electronic music or dance music, the choice of the kick is what's important. If you do a poor choice at the beginning, because you cannot hear if it's the right kick or not, it will end up costing you a lot of times at the end of the production. So making decisions and working faster with proper systems is maybe not speeding up the creative process, but it's speeding up fixing things if something wasn't right in the beginning of the process. So having the calibration on the new headphones, it's great. So when I first plugged them in, I didn't have the software set up, and I listened to it and I was like, wow, it really sounds great. I was checking different mixes, and I could really hear mixing mistakes, obviously, that I know were there. I can hear very well when I've done everything right. So this was the first impression, even without calibration. And then finally, when I put the software on, it was even like, wow. I was thinking I hear 100%, but when the calibration was on, I was like, no, it was only 90 now, or even only 80, because it makes a big difference. In my headphones, there's a bass boost, and for me, because I'm doing a lot of electronic music, it made a big difference in like perceiving the low end in what I would be, how I would treat the bass drum or the bass, and it makes a difference. Not so much, I think, in the mid or in the high end, but having like a more balanced sound and be easy to judge the lower end. That was the big difference that the calibration was doing to me for the X1 headphones.
For me, what I felt was really nice was that without the calibration, the headphones come across really clean and detailed, particularly in the low mids and the low frequencies, and that I was really able to get into that tricky area of the frequency response of a mix and really dial in. And then what I'm able to do then is to bring in the calibration up to full, and then I could then, what it was doing for me was really filling out the low end. And so that is a really useful tool to just have there or in the plugin with a a fader or a slider to adjust that to the precise amount that feels good for you, and that really helps in that translation, that device translation scenario. I have to say, I just really love that I can use the headphones without the calibration software and just get really great mixes, and they just sound so clean. And the idea that you can take that calibration curve, that EQ curve that's readily available, and just use any standard EQ plugin to apply that is brilliant. If you are the sort of engineer that does travel from studio to studio, you don't need to ask to install a plugin on their system. You just call up an EQ and just dial it in yourself, save it as a preset, and so that's a really great feature to have, and yeah, pretty unique. I don't think I have seen that anywhere else.
If you ask to anybody who is not in our business, they say, oh, it's just the nuances. But I mean, the nuances are everything for us. So I think there is actually improvement. When I first unpacked the headphones and I tried without the balancing thing because I didn't have the code yet. And I say, oh, cool. Absolutely. I was already very convinced and impressed. But then the actual balance, the algorithm, whatever you want on matching with my pair, was actually, it did a little improvement that I felt right away. I felt that the little nuances, like you said, to me are not that little, so it makes a difference.
I'm really liking them with the calibration. So a lot of the time what happens is if I'm tracking vocals with another vocalist particularly, I'll be operating and recording and stuff, and they would be on obviously like the mic and whatever. So for me, I've always used open back headphones in order to track vocalists, and they're on closed backs, fine. But for me, I always want to hear it like I would hear it in a studio if we were in a control room, live room setting. Exactly. And it's like more and more, like even I can be in big facilities, and people still want to track in the room with you, right? And I love that because that's just who I am. I'm like always engaging with the artist and, that was a really good take. Let's go for, like, it removes all of those things. But the problem with that always was, I don't get the same sound. But now with something like this, it's way easier for me to feel like, okay, I'm accurately hearing what the sonics of the vocal are like. Previously, listening like this, like say you're tracking with a vocalist and you're tracking for, let's say, up to an hour, and then when you take the headphones off and you listen back from the speakers, you get a completely different sound, and actually that makes me feel a little bit unwell. Like it makes me feel ill inside. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like when people get that woozy feeling from like phasing. So for me, and the first time I've tried it, I wasn't able to implement it straight away, but the next day or the day after, I had a vocalist coming in, so I was like, okay, cool. So on my headphone output, I'm going to put the calibration software, work with the X1s, and obviously when I take them off and when we're playing them back through the loudspeakers, it just doesn't. I don't have that same feeling. I don't feel like, oh my god, there's such a huge difference between the two. Now I need to adjust my ears to the sound of the room or whatever. And I think, obviously for me, that's marvelous in that kind of way.
Everyone, when it's just starting and learning, we like to buy plugins, we like to buy hardware and all that because we enjoy that, right? There was something that I was missing for a long time, and then I found out it was monitoring. That's the most important thing if you work with audio, of course, that's what we do. And if you work with audio, it's important that you listen properly what you're doing. And then when I found out that, and I started investing more in monitoring, either monitors, speakers, or headphones, my mixes went from here to here instantly. Even when I had the same knowledge about techniques and the same gear and plugins, my mixes improved a lot just because the good monitoring.
The demand to work outside the studio, it's getting like higher and higher, you know. This year, for example, I had to do more masters than I expected outside the studio. If I'm traveling and I need to rely on any equipment, it is going to be the X1, you know, because apart from being like a great headphone, I have like the security of it's calibrated. So I have the software standalone. If I need it, I can put it on the DAW, and I know the headphone is flat response. It's not interfering where it shouldn't be interfering, which is very important for me as a master engineer. You know, maybe as a mix engineer, you need more like creativity, you need more bass or something like that. But as a master engineer, I like things like to sound flat, you know. I don't need emotion. The emotion was created already before.
I've started OLLO Audio about a decade ago. When I got, my first kids, I got twins. And at the time I was working on a record for my band. And all of a sudden I was not able to use my speakers anymore. Actually, I wasn't even anywhere near the studio that I was used to. So when I was researching different headphones and tried them out, they never translated the way I wanted to, even though I spent a lot of time learning them. Someday I've started to just collect little bits and pieces to make my own headphones. And once I tuned them the way at the time I thought was great and kind of flat, I showed them around, and all of a sudden another friend wanted them, and another friend. And now a decade later, there's over 15,000 OLLO friends trusting, these headphones, the S4, the S5, and now the X1. So it's been a journey, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds for us. But I think that the X1 are just another page on this quest mission to deliver really true and flat and balanced studio monitoring headphones to all the professionals, modern day professionals who do not really work from one studio, who don't really have resources to even own a studio. So I think that there's a lot of interesting things coming our way in the next decade.
So over the years, I've worked with many famous people, many not so famous people. I'm probably most proud and well known for working as an engineer on Rihanna's Unapologetic album, which is a Grammy award-winning album as well.
I've been making music for 47 years now. When I got hired by Trident, I knew nothing about the studio. I knew nothing about the history of the studio. It turned out one day when I got caught playing the piano and someone came screaming in at me saying, "Who on earth do you think you are? How do you have..." They weren't quite as polite as that, but they said, "What gives you the right to touch that piano?" And then they reeled off this incredible list of the Beatles' Hey Jude and the White Album, some Martha My Dear, Dear Prudence, those songs, David Bowie's first 3 albums, Hunky Dory, Ziggy Stardust, albums that changed my life 6 years earlier, or even 5 years earlier had changed my life. I was now sitting at that piano in that studio as I felt the magic of the place as this came together, and there was music being made in the mix room on the floor above. As I started to become aware of what happened and what was created in this building, I actually realized this is where I'm meant to be. This is my place, and I'm just going to have to learn how all of this stuff works.
Our journey started actually in a van, and we were traveling for 5 years around the world, recording and supporting bands in places like Morocco, where we're going to build a music production school now, in places like Albania, where I lived for 2 years as well, Armenia, Turkey, Greece, everywhere. This journey brought me even to Los Angeles, where I joined the Produce Like a Pro team as a mentor for music production, where you can find my tutorials and courses.
I worked with Martinho da Vila, which we won the Grammy last year, Best Samba Album. And we got nominated this year as well, but with a different artist, which is Eli Soares. It's more like Christian music, which is great, you know, because it's very versatile. One is samba and the other one is like more fusion and more Christian, completely different needs.
But my credits, again, goes from Steve Vais, Yardbirds, Scott Anderson, Steve Vais label, private owned label, and I actually did many projects with them. So I met different people from Frank Gambale to, again, the Yardbirds, Steve Lukather, Brian May in the project, Jeff Beck in the project, Slash.
I worked for the BBC for a number of years, and it was fantastic training ground. I worked with all sorts of artists back then, from Adele to Lady Gaga to the Black Keys, which was one of my favourite sessions, The Cure. Honestly, there are so many names to drop here.
I played on loads of different records as a session guitar player, and then that led me into the kind of world of pop writing and production. And in the last 10 years, I've been mostly doing that. Some of my favorite stuff I've been doing in the last few years is a band called Black Honey from the UK, who are kind of indie rock band. Another band called Everyone You Know, who are kind of, I guess, more dance music style. My role in that was more as a collaborator to sort of work on chords and the musical side of it as a guitar player. And then also most recently Gabriel Aplin's new EP, which is called Writer's Block.
I'm helping other DJs, taking them, going the same way that I did, and one of those guys is Jacksamy. Jacksamy is a young DJ from Berlin, and we happen to have a big hit this year called Pedro, and me as co-producing alongside him and doing the final mixing, and we did 4 platinum records and 7 gold records this year with his single Pedro.
So I'm Tokyo from Tokyo Spears from Walk Off the Earth. Johnny the singer, had been looking for some new engineers, and now I'm the full-time in-house producer engineer as well. So I do the mixing, the mastering, the production, and then we all work together as a group on the music, obviously. But the one who's going to be spending 90% of the time doing the editing or doing the mixing is going to be me. So that's where I come in.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm proud of all of the works I've done before, because I really like to connect with the people I'm working with. It's not just like, okay, let's mix this song. It's because I really like what I'm doing. So, but last month I was working, well, no, it was like 2 months ago, I was working with a Venezuelan artist, which I didn't do for probably years since I moved from Venezuela. I've been working more like with English artists lately. But I'm very proud of that one because it was done, everything was done like in home studio situation, and it became a big record. And the artist is called Dani Barón, featuring Omar K11. And the song is really simple, but at the same time it's very complex, the way all the instruments works. And yeah, I really loved that mix.